I'm coming. Just turning some lights on. Oop. There we go. Hello, how are we? So today we're going to take our spine through all of its ranges of motion. So we've got, I'll just sit sideways, we've got all these little curves in our spine. So our sacrum bone kind of tucks under and we get this C shape, and then our lower back curves slightly forward, and then our mid back has the same C shape as our sacrum, and then our neck has the same little curve as our lower back. And so what we're looking at is trying to keep those curves in our spine and keep things mobile. Tighten our head back. We often get restricted in some areas. Some areas are designed to move more than others, some less. Some have more twist, some less twist. Like our neck, for example, has lots of range to turn generally, whereas other parts of our spine don't turn so well. Some parts of our spine we can round forward a lot, some parts we can back bend a lot. So areas like our lower back has generally a lot more range for back bending than our upper back. So we're going to take our spine through all of these ranges today and just notice what's going on, any areas of restriction, and just release. So our spine is usually made up of 33 bones. It can vary. Some people have more, some people have less, and we want those bones to be working together and to be able to have their full range of motion. It's kind of nature's architectural masterpiece, really, if you think about the anatomy of the spine and how it works. It's incredible design. It houses our central nervous system, and it tells us how important that nervous system is by the structure that's wrapped around it. So those bones are dense, strong bones that are protecting this cord, which is like our superhighway of information, and then moves up to the brain, and then the brain has this wrapper around it of strong structural bones to protect it. So it really tells us how important that nervous system is. And for those of you who have ever suffered any kind of issue or injury in the spine or anything to do with the nerves, you know how much restriction you can have when there's something going wrong there. So let's just start down in child's pose. Today, have a block or two, and maybe if you need some padding underneath you for a hard floor, then I would pop some padding in underneath you. So just come down into child's pose, toes together, knees apart, and just walk the body forward. You can cross the forearms, make a little pillow for yourself, cross the forehead, rest the forehead down onto the blocks. Doesn't matter if the heels don't meet the hips, that's okay. Just settle in, make yourself relatively comfortable here, maybe some padding under the ankles or under the sitting bones if the hips are lifted a long way from the floor. And then I want you to watch that when you've come forward, if the floor's a wee way away, sometimes we slide our neck forward and kind of drop it to the floor, which really compresses between where the neck vertebra join onto the upper back vertebra. So see if you can keep those curves somewhat in your spine here, especially around the neck in this shape. So lift the head a little if you need to. And just take a few moments just to settle in, to notice the spine, although there'll be plenty of other areas that perhaps are letting you know there's some tension, maybe around the ankles, knees, hips, glutes, lower back. But just start to connect into the spine. You can soften the shoulders, check in with the jaw and the eyes to see that you're not tensing or scrunching. Notice the breath. Does one side of the body seem to move a little freer than the other, or expand a little more than the other? And then just nice and slow, we're going to make our way up into tabletop position and come into a little bit of movement in the spine. Always when we're in our tabletop position, we want to make sure that we're really protecting the shoulders and the wrists by really nice strong alignment in the hands. So spread the palms nice and wide. For some people you get a better opening in the shoulder if you just turn the hands out a little bit. So either index fingers parallel or just turn a little bit. And then the elbow creases, we turn those forward so that if you were to do a press up, the elbows would come back towards the knees rather than flare out to the sides. And then imagine you're hugging a block in between the forearms, or that you're drawing or magnetizing the forearms towards each other, and feel that inner hand press down to the floor so the index finger and thumb really connect strongly into the floor. We do that because these little bones on the outer wrist, the ulnar bone that runs down the outside of the arm, it's not designed to load weight onto, and if we're collapsing out here, we're starting to create some pressure points in around the wrist. So that's the reason we do that. That's why I often talk about how important that is. Slide the shoulders away from the ears, reach the crown of the head away from the tailbone, and just knit the front ribs towards the back ribs. This is more activity, so it's a little bit more yang energy, it's a little bit more doing. So here, just connect into the shapes of your spine. Where, as I said, our tailbone, generally it curls under, the sacrum bone has a little kind of C shape, the lower back has a little dipping curve, the mid and upper back start to round up a little bit, and then the neck has that little C curve as well, dipping down. And then from here we're going to lift the sitting bones up, let the belly start to drop, slide the heart forward and look forward. And then press into the floor with your hands nice and strong, chin towards the chest, let the upper back move towards the ceiling, squeeze the navel back and curl the tail under. These are the movements of the spine we call flexion and extension. So here we're coming into extension, which is our back bend. So we're closing the gap between the vertebrae at the back body, opening the front, and then as we exhale, squeeze the navel back, and we reverse that. We open the vertebrae around the back and squeeze them in at the front. So just find a nice rhythm here with your breath. We want to be ending the inhale as we come forward at the end of that, and then as we exhale at the peak of that place, we want to have emptied our breath, create space. Just a few cycles, a few more here. Noticing for you anywhere in the spine that feels like there's any restriction. Is there any little niggles going on anywhere? The last one, coming into that cat position. We'll just hold for a moment in this cat pose. Think of the visual of the Halloween cat. Again, just check in on that foundation of the arms and give the head a little nod and a little shake to make sure you're not gripping or tensing around the neck. We're pressing the hands into the floor, drawing the navel back and pulling those front ribs towards the back of the body and feeling the upper back rounding. Nice, and we'll come back through neutral. We're going to tuck the toes under here, walk the hands back a little, and you may need your blocks here just to give you a little bit more height. And we're just going to start to lift up. Step the feet forward a little, parallel the feet, and just come into a dangling pose. So the knees could be bent a lot. You could rest your forearms down onto the thighs if hanging forward is too much, but I want you to feel as if your spine is falling from the hips like a waterfall. If you can bring the hands to the floor, or you could have your hands down onto blocks, a little stack of blocks to rest onto. So if it's the hamstrings that are really stopping you moving forward, then bend the knees a little more. If you've crashed into yourself and your thighs and your belly have met and you feel like you could lean forward, if you didn't have those things in the way, you could widen the feet out a little bit. So we want this length between the tailbone and the crown of the head. Again, nod the head, give it a shake. Often for many of us it's going to be the hamstrings that will start to speak first. For some it will be the lower back, and it can be all sorts of places, but this is what we call axial extension. So we're getting the space in between each of the vertebrae because gravity is taking a different pull on the body. First thing in the morning, our pads between our vertebrae are at their flattest. They're at their juiciest, they're at plumpest if we've laid down overnight. So they're filled with fluid, and the ligaments around the spine are often at their tightest first thing in the morning. And at the end of the day, or as the day goes on, when we're standing upright, the vertebrae start to compress down on those little discs and flatten them out a little bit. But the ligaments often have a little bit more movement. It takes about 2 hours of laying down for those little discs to start to plump back up again. Making us a little bit taller. Now here it might feel good for you to bend one knee and then the other and just sway from side to side, letting the torso sway. I often like to think of that elephant swaying its trunk. Sometimes that just brings a little bit of movement and it just helps us to stay a little longer in the pose. Connecting into the breath, send breath into anywhere that feels like there's some tension, and often the shoulders will start to tense, so just release the shoulders. Often the neck will start to grip, so just give the head a shake and a nod. These inversions are so good for us. They help to release the lymphatic fluid, drain it back towards the lymph ducts in the throat. They nourish the brain. They say 90% of the nourishment for the brain comes from movement of the spine. So flexible spine, flexible mind. Now just start to heel toe your feet a little closer towards each other, still hip width. And then soften into the knees, and then super slow, keep the head heavy, rolling ragdoll. So just vertebra by vertebra, start to roll yourself up. You might lose my head in the video here. And then just standing upright. See if you can line the hips up over the ankles, the shoulders over the hips, and the crown of the head up over the tailbone. Looking for this nice plumb line. Again, just notice into those curves now that we're in a standing position. Notice the curves in the spine, what curves forward, what rounds backwards. And then bring the hands onto the legs. You're going to soften into the knees and we're going to roll back down again. So the chin's going to come towards the chest. We're going to round the shoulders forward. Slide the hands down the legs, bending the knees as much as you need to. And see if you can just try and articulate vertebra by vertebra. Sometimes they won't, they move as a block. And then rolling back down. And then we'll take that back up. We're going to do this a few times. So rolling slowly slowly, slowly. Weight of the head, weight of the arms. Feel your tailbone as if it carries on all the way down to the floor like a big kangaroo tail to support you. Rolling back up. Down we go again, shin towards the chest. Thinking of our cat-cow position here, and when we come into that Halloween cat, this is the shape we're looking for as we roll down. You can draw the front ribs back as you come down, draw the navel back. Up we go. And then last one down, and we're just going to come into dangling from a slightly different position. So rolling, rolling, rolling. Now bring the hands down onto the floor or onto your blocks. Just step forward, and we're just going to widen the feet out. So taking them out much wider than the width of the mat. You could turn around if your feet have come off the floor and you're on a slippery surface. Bend the knees again a lot, and then you're going to start to fold forward. So same thing here, you could put blocks in under the head, you could put your blocks under the forearms, you could even put your elbows onto a chair. But I want you just to look down towards your feet and see that your feet, the outer edges of the feet are parallel. So instead of the feet turning out and toes pointing out, I want them so that the feet are parallel to each other. And just notice for you, does this change anything? Having the legs further apart often takes a lot of the tension out of the hamstrings. It could intensify the forward fold. You can still have your knees bent if you need to. Still wanting that feeling of the spinal column falling out of the hips. Gravity pulling into the spine, the weight of the head, lengthening the spine, nod and shake. For some of you who are really flexible and your head may have come to the floor, you might need to just make that gap a little closer between the feet so that you can still hang. Otherwise, if the head's on the floor, then we're starting to compress and lose that axial extension. So it's definitely wakes the hamstrings up as well. Just 3 more breaths here. Where could you soften? This is our yoga version of an inversion table for the spine. And we hang upside down, lengthening the spine, creating space in the discs and the ligaments, rehydrating the brain and the nervous system. Now, hands can come back onto the blocks. Just start to bring yourself back upright. Just enough to heel toe the feet towards each other. And then we're going to just come down onto the floor again. Now, if you were like me and you're on a little bit of a harder surface, then I'd suggest just popping this underneath the hips. We're going to come down into a pose called reclined Buddha. So in reclined Buddha, we want to imagine that we're lying onto a beam, so that we're on this, I've got this line on my mat, which is nice because it gives me a nice sense of alignment. So you want your hip and your hand to be in line with each other, and you can bring the legs out as well, so you're on this long plane here, and the shoulder can hitch up around the ear, that's okay. One hand can rest out in front of you or be on a block, And you could bend that top leg so that it supports you, because we're so on the beam, so on this little line, that you're going to feel like you maybe want to roll forward or back. What we're trying to get is the side seam of the body. So here we're in a side bend, the lateral movement of the spine. If it feels a lot, for anyone who's got things going on in the shoulder and it's hard work here, then you could stack your blocks or have a block so that you don't have to weight there onto the arm. You could also come right down to the floor. So we've got this side bend happening. For those of you that are up onto your arm, I want you, like we do when we're in our tabletop position and we're trying to open the front part of the chest, turn the bicep as if you're trying to turn it to the top of the mat. So we're nice and stable in the shoulder, but the shoulder can lift around the ear. Just look down towards your feet and see that your feet are right in line with the hips. Often one of the tricks, I'm going to turn sideways so you can see, one of the tricks the body will try and do is it'll stick the booty back so that we fold in the middle. I want you to try and get your hips forward. So we're on this nice long line. For me, I always am amazed by how much tension I'm carrying in through the side body. The body will also sometimes try to lean forward or lean back. So just play around a little, and it's micro movements to find where is your best edge, where is the place where you feel the most amount of sensation that you can stay with, sustainable, you can breathe into. It looks so simple when you see the reclining Buddha in images. It looks very peaceful and calm, but this one can bring up a lot of tension. So we're compressing into this left side of the spine, and we're opening the right side. And along with the spine, we're getting lots of opening into the ribs, IT band, building some strength in the shoulder or the arm to support us to stay upright, even if you're on your elbow. And you could drop your ear over towards the shoulder, close the eyes down, and just connect into the breath. Anytime it feels too much, just back away, either come down onto the elbow, down onto a block, or completely drop to the floor. For some, if you find you have much more range, again there's options to come up a little higher, block in under the hand, but we want the feeling that the rib cage is falling towards the floor. If you think about like a string of pearls attached from the base of the skull down to the tailbone, see if you can allow it to hang without any kinks or knots. Notice if the body's trying to sneak around and skip past something that's feeling a little intense, but never painful. No pain is good pain. So you could be all the way down here, and that could be plenty. So much of this depends on the shape of our spine, and we all have very different spines, so what one person's spine can do, someone else's spine will never be able to do and should never do. So the nice thing when we're practicing at home is that we're not comparing ourselves to what other people are doing generally, but often if we're in a group situation, we look around and we see other people doing something that we think is better. It might be better for them, might not be too, but it may not be better for you. So don't judge what you see and think that you should be able to do it. A yin practice is really about feeling whether we can sense if we're overdoing or underdoing, not only physically but sometimes emotionally. Some days we just need to cut ourselves some slack and take it a little easier. Other days we might have a little more capacity to push a wee bit more. But soften. To get into that yin tissue, we've got to ungrip the muscles in the areas that we're trying to lengthen or compress. Last breath here. I talked a lot, kept you there for a while. Gently bend the elbow. Lift yourself back up enough just to bring the legs to stack on top of each other, still in this side position. And then we're just going to turn the torso. So start to walk the hands towards the back of the mat. You might even need to lift the hips and send them back a little bit to reach that left hand forward. So here we're in a little bit of a twist here. So the hips are nice and fixed, stationary. You could stay upright, and that could be plenty. Or you could start to come down onto your forearms. You could bring the head onto a block. If you've got a bolster laying down underneath the torso here would be another nice option. One hand on either side of the bolster so that you've got somewhere to lay down onto. Or you could even pop your blocks and underneath you. And option, you can come all the way down, cross the forearms. Now the movement of our spine here, coming into a spinal twist, so we wring the spine out. For me, I prefer to have the head turning in the direction of the knees, but some of you might be able to turn the head the other direction. I often, in my body, it can feel just a little much. If you're upright, there's much more work in the arms for you guys. So, same thing here is that you're turning the biceps forward to support the shoulders, and we have to learn when we're in a yin practice and we're engaging muscles that we want to be able to engage the arms to support you, but we want to be able to switch the rest off so that it's in a yin place. So yin being that we're soft, we're not gripping or tensing. Our yang energy in our arms is that we're turning the muscles on to keep ourselves upright. So you've got the little bit of a disadvantage there compared to those that can come forward and to widen the elbows, because they can completely relax. But not everybody's body is ready to come into the deepest shape. So really listen to what your body needs. Now there's also an option for everybody, no matter which shape you're in, to add a little bit of a hip flexor stretch. And you can just start to slide that top knee back and let it drop back behind you. We get into the hip flexor and we get into the psoas muscle, and the psoas muscle attaches to all of the vertebrae in our lower back and often gets tight from sitting and can be one of the causes of lower back issues. Now once you've found your position, see if you can completely soften. You can slide that top knee forward if you've gone too far, and as you settle in you can start to slide it back. Often the hip that you're lying onto will want to grip and tense a little more. and soften that. And then just notice the breath. For most of us, or some of us, there'll be a compression on one side, and so the left side is probably opening a little bit more with the breath. Just 2 more breaths. If you've got that top knee slid back, just bring it and stack it back onto the bottom one, and it can feel tender, so no hurry, pausing. If you're laying forward, slide the hands back in under the shoulders, draw the shoulders back and start to engage the arms and shoulders, and start to press yourself upright. And then just clear the decks. We're just going to come down onto our backs and move slow. It can feel really tender as those tissues start to contract back again. You can have the knees bent and falling together. You could reach the legs out long. Hands could be on the body or on the floor. We often think these pauses that we take during yin seem to be like nothing is happening. We're just lying around, almost like we're wasting time. For some people feel like, oh, I want to get on, just want to do more yoga, more poses. These little pauses are so important for all this information to start to be received by the body. Signals going back into the nervous system, travelling up and down the spinal column, through the nerves, up to the brain, giving us feedback, telling the body it needs to start to produce some new substances, chemicals to produce new fascia, new hyaluronic acid to rehydrate, collagen and elastin to keep our tissues strong but stretchy. Not so often we get these pauses in our day or in our life just to completely indulge, to bring our awareness fully into ourselves and internally, letting go of distractions around us, lists of things to do or not to do, and just feel into the body. What's happening on the left side compared to the right side? Is there any movement in under the tissues? Any sensations? When we release these fascial adhesions, fluid starts to flow between the muscle and the fascia, pushing out these blockages. Not only in our physical body, but in our energetic channels. And often when we start to learn how to feel into our body during our yoga practice, that we can start to notice when things are a little bit off in daily life. You can start to sense that maybe we need to take a little bit of time out. Maybe we need to take a little bit more rest or sleep. And then just hug the knees in towards you. A little rock from side to side. And then we'll just make a little bit of movement. So just rounding into the spine. Hold on behind the thighs and just rock back and forward from tail to head. Giving your spine a little massage. Keep the chin tucked towards the chest and make your spine a little bit more rounded and a little bit more flexion, which helps you to roll a little more. So those little Tommy Tippy toys the kids used to have. And then we're going to come over to the other side, so you can either turn around so you can stay facing me, or you can turn your back to me. Take any props you might need. And then we're going to find our reclined Buddha on the other side. And remember, we want to try and get the hips in line with the heel, especially that bottom one. The hand in line with the shoulder and the shoulder in line with the hip. So as if we're lying on one of our gymnastics beams. This shoulder could have something different going on than the other side. So if that's the case, just modify. Come down onto the forearm. Still, actually bring your hand onto your rib cage if you can, wherever you are. And then let the rib cage drop towards the floor. Nice. Same thing if you're up higher. It's just dropping down. So we're opening up. We're fanning out through the rib cage and creating space into the vertebral column on that left side. We're compressing into the right side. So just make sure there's nothing sharp or painful. For anyone who has got disc issues, need to be really careful here. So if there's any numbness, any tingling, anything sharp or shooting, then change your posture, and I'll show you another option. Sorry, and I should have said this in the beginning, that you could come into a banana pose and maybe you just shift the upper body over towards the side, and that gives you an opening without it being too much. And often we can add the legs, but if you've got any issues in the discs, sometimes just adding the legs could be too much. So it's a similar shape, but when we're in reclined Buddha, we've got a different pull of gravity, so it often makes it a little more intense. So you choose. Top leg can bend, come down onto the forearm, head can rest onto the shoulder, hand resting out in front to support you. But just watch, if you're in reclined Buddha, watch that your booty isn't tucking back and you're not folding into the hips or flexing into the hips. We want the hips to be forward. So we're on that nice long line. And then I'll be quiet on the side. So just close the eyes down if you're comfortable. Let the gaze drop down so you're not distracted by things around you. Start to connect into your breath. Same thing if you're lying on your back and in banana pose. Where could you soften? Seeing if you can find that peaceful Buddha face. Just a quick scan through the body and check that the glutes haven't gripped on. Check the quads and then notice the breath again. Remembering you can modify to find a little bit more if the body has opened up, or you can modify to find a little less if things have become intense. Last breath. And super slow. Start to bend the knees. Stack the knees together. Just if you need any props in there at the other end of the mat, bring them down to act as a support. We're going to keep the hips as they are, turn the torso. So we've got our twist in our spine. Maybe you stay here, this could be enough. Or for those of you that have space, you can come on down either onto a bolster, you can come on down onto your blocks, or you can come all the way down to the floor, turning the head in the same direction as the knees, or if it's okay in your neck and you're not straining, you can turn it to look the other way, but very often that's a lot in the neck. And then we can slide that top knee back to get into our hip flexor. Often you can tuck the knee in behind the arch of the front foot. Soften the shoulders. And if you can let the breath start to become a little longer. You guys that are upright, remember there's that little bit more work for you in the arms. Soften the torso. The chin can drop towards the chest if you're upright. You can bring blocks out in front and come down onto the elbows or forearms if you find space starts to open up for you. Really listening into whatever's going on in the spine. Feel where the twists are at their deepest, and that'll depend a lot on which position you're in. And more breaths. And then releasing that top leg forward. Just moving enough to be able to bring yourself over onto your back. You can feel tender. For me, the left side, letting me know to move slowly. Line yourself up. Legs could be out long. or the feet could be wide, the knees falling together. Just taking this time to pause and reset. And then just grab your blocks, and if you don't have blocks, you can make a stack with your blankets or cushions off the sofa. We're going to take a bridge pose. So we've opened into the hip flexors a little, so you may feel okay to come up onto 2 blocks. I like the blocks to be the wide way. I'll just roll my back to you and show you. So we've got our SI joints where our sacrum bone joins onto the hip bones. And if we take the blocks, the narrow setting, which is quite common this way, and we're up quite high, for some pelvises, it means these sacrum joints are not stabilized, so they can kind of slip back and forward. And if you've got any SI joint problems, you'll know that that can be a really awful feeling. So when we bring the blocks the wide way, for most of us, that's going to let our SI joints be resting down. So you could do 1 or 2 blocks, press into the feet, we lift the hips up. So sometimes you've got to come up onto your toes, and if you're struggling to get the 2 blocks in, just start with 1, and we let the hips sink down onto the blocks. If you want to do 1 block, you could do this way, so the width way. It's still giving you a nice support under the sacrum, but it's not as high as 2 blocks. So if you're somewhere in the middle of being the block on its lowest setting, the block on the medium setting, or 2 blocks, just play with that and see what works for you. For me, I like the sense of 2 blocks, and for some people 3 blocks, they're fine. Depends on, again, how much flexibility you have in your spine, not because you've worked harder or done any more than anyone else often, just sometimes the spinal bones have more room. For those of us who don't have a lot of space between the bits that stick out at the back of the spine, you'll find that we can't backbend very deeply. Some people have a lot of space and they can backbend more deeply. What you'll feel is tension in the front body if you've got more range of motion generally. If you've got no more range of motion, it'll feel like your bones are pressing into each other, excuse me, in the back of the body. So before we lengthen the legs out, and we're going to play around with that, press into the feet and lengthen the tailbone. And sorry, I should have said to you, don't turn your head and look at me while you're in this shape. Keep the neck and the head just in line. And then we've got the option here to start straightening out the legs, and I suggest doing 1 and noticing how that feels. If it gets too much, then bend the knee and stay in that position. For some of us, we can start to straighten both legs, but watching for any pinch in the lower back where those bones are pushing together. And if you're clenching your glutes and gripping unclench, and if that creates too much tension, then bend one leg and just do one leg at a time. Press the elbows into the floor and just slide the shoulders away from the ears to give space in the neck, and then palms facing up. So here we've got our back bend, so we're in spinal extension, lengthening the connective tissue all the way along the front of the body. If you've got just one leg bent, switch it out to the other and see if that feels okay. Excuse me. Taking our spine through all these ranges of motion. Forward bend, back bend, side bend, twist, and that lengthening of the spine. I'm pretty sure it's a Bruce Lee quote that says, notice how the stiffest tree breaks, while the bamboo and the willows survive by bending in the wind. We want a spine that can bend in the wind. Slowly, slowly, and you need to be careful because it can feel tender as we start to come out. So just, if you've got both legs bent, just drag the heel along the floor rather than lifting the foot up off the floor. And then drag the other foot along the floor. And then bringing the soles of the feet back in line with the sitting bones. Just pausing here with both knees bent. Some of you might have stayed in this shape. That's fine, just a few more breaths. Now to come off the blocks, I want you to draw the pubic bone towards the navel, so you feel the tailbone lengthen towards the back of the knees. Press into the feet, and to clear the blocks, sometimes you've got to come up onto the tippy toes, but don't drop your back into a big arch here in the lower back. Keep lengthening the tailbone to the back of the knees, and then slide the blocks out. And then, like we did when we were doing our roll down rag dolls, upper back presses into the floor, squeeze the ribs back. Pubic bone even more towards the navel, so you're rounding through the spine. Vertebra by vertebra. Excuse me. Now walk the feet out a little wider. You're going to drop the knees over towards the right and then turn the head to the left. And switch that out, just rocking from side to side. I think this, in our yin practice, is a much nicer kind of twist for the neck than turning it in opposite direction when we're fixed. But again, everyone's different, but just rocking from side to side. Head goes in one direction, hips and knees in the other. Neutralizing the lower back. And then I'm going to give you again a couple of options for Shavasana today. So knees together, feet apart, legs out long. Or today, if it feels good for you, maybe you roll over onto your side. You can pop a block in under the head, draw the knees up, coming into that fetal shape. It can feel quite nice after we've been in a back bend, just to come into this forward bend for a little longer. And then whichever position you're in, let the body drop. If you're lying on your back, hands could be onto the floor, palms facing up, or they could be resting onto the body. If you're lying onto the side, maybe you've got a block in under the head or a pillow, or you can have your hand in under the head. And allow the breath to flow into the torso, down to the pelvis, up into the mid-chest and up and under the armpits. Just see if you can notice any movement that the breath makes throughout the spine. Feeling the weight of the body, especially on the exhales. The body becomes a little denser, a little heavier. So heavy that you're going to leave the imprint of your body in whichever shape you're in. And as you're lying here, just thinking about the parts of the body that are going to leave the deepest imprint. If the legs are out long, the shape would be different when you get up to if the knees are bent and the feet are on the floor. And that shape will be different too if you're laying on your side. Which parts of the body are making the heaviest contact? And then nice and slow, whichever shape you're in, just start to bring yourself over onto the side if you're not there already. And then we've worked with the spine, so be nice and careful that you support yourself. Use the arms to lift yourself up with rather than just cranking yourself up. Coming into any seated position. You need to elevate the hips to get that nice little lumbar curve. Lift yourself up onto something. And then we'll just tap into the spine here in an upright position. So feeling the shoulders in line with the hips. The ears are in line with the shoulders, and then you could imagine here that you've got a plumb line, a string attached to the crown of the head. So the crown of the head is about in the center of the head here. So if you feel it's up over the neck vertebra. So imagine you've got something pulling you upwards, and let the spine hang from that and feel the tailbone underneath. Just noticing again these curves that we get in the spine. Little S bends, slight forward curve of the neck, the curving back of the upper back and the forward curve of the lower back, and then the curling under of the sacrum, the tailbone. And then let's just connect the hands. Gently feel the contact between the left hand and the right hand, connecting us into our left and right hemispheres of the brain. Gently pressing the palms together, connecting into that physical midline, the spine, connecting into the nervous system, our big energy center. And then also connecting into the energy center that's unseen, remembering that our chakra system sits along the spinal column. And then just let the chin drop towards the chest, bowing down to yourself. Namaste. Excuse me. Enjoy whatever's next in your day. That practice would be fine for any time of the day. So if you joined me in the morning, it'll feel quite different to practicing it again later in the day. As I said, the discs are in a different place morning and evening. The ligaments, the length of the ligaments and the movement of the ligaments is different from morning to evening. So quite a nice practice to compare if you did it in the morning and then did it later in the day, and notice how did it feel? How was it? Did it feel different? Let me know.